The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am back. Lovin' baseball when we were 12 and innocent. My guest is Clay Dreslock. Now, I know a lot about you, Clay, but I don't know the derivative of your name, so let's start with that.
All right. Well, when I was born, my name was Clay Dresser, a name I got from my father, as many people do. But when I got married, I married a lovely woman named Deirdre McLaughlin, and we decided instead of her taking my name that we would combine our last names. So we kept the dress from my part because is just sort of meaningless, and we kept the lock from her name because McLaughlin means keeper of the lake, and lock is lake. So we're now just Dreslock. And that's why it's a hard K.
I am incredibly impressed by that because that is really imaginative and non-sexist and all the good things that go with it. Clay, you've used your imagination for a lot of things, I know, but let's start baseball-wise, computer-wise, developing games, computer games. I think I'm prejudiced in this because there's a game out that you invented. It's called Baseball Mogul, and I've played Baseball Mogul for 11 years, or something like 9, 10, 11 years. 1911 or 2011 was the first game that I got. And people ask me, as a fanatical baseball fan and an old-time baseball fan, vintage guy who doesn't like change and stuff, how do you live with baseball the way it is? And I say that's only a small part. The real baseball is only a small part. I've got leagues, 2 leagues. One is the 1958 National whole league, the whole National League. I play the Braves. American League, I play the Yankees, and awesome. I also have a league that is unique to me because I grew up in New York in the 50s, and I was 12 in 1958. But beyond that, I play a league with there are only 6 of them. I'll list the teams, and you'll understand how cool this is for me. The 1955 Dodgers, the 1954 Giants, the 1953 Yankees, the 1961 Yankees, the 1963 Dodgers, and the 1962 Giants. I think I've got them all.
That's awesome.
That's 6 teams. They play each other. I'm totally familiar with all of them. And after 9 years, playing them over and over again. And the only question is, will Billy Lowe's win? Billy Lowe's grew up in Jackson Heights, New York, where I grew up. He was a number of years ahead of me. But when I play, I think of Jackson Heights, and I think of growing up and being 12 there. Okay, now the one compliment I want to give you, that your game is so incredibly unique. Here it is. When I pull up the 1958 season and I go to any of the teams that played in 58, I get to see who played in the minors in those years. They didn't necessarily have to play in 58, but you have the option of bringing them up if you want. I play strictly by statistics of that year, so I don't do it. But it gives me a reference to who is coming up in the minor leagues. May I ask? Has that been a big selling point? Do people talk about that? I think it's incredibly great. How did that come about? How did that come about in your putting the thing together? The computer stuff, how you put it together, that's so beyond me. I can't even believe, and I only have one question about that. But how did you come up in your mind with the idea of listing all the players who were in the minors? When did that come together?
Well, the Baseball Mogul was originally, I started programming on it in 1995, and at the time I wanted to make a management simulation because there were games like Or Weaver Baseball out there, Tony La Russa Baseball, which I actually had worked on before that, but I felt that you needed more of a general manager game where you actually could offer a trade to the computer and it would decide whether or not to take it. And so you could, instead of just deciding, obviously it's a lot of fun to be like, all right, I'm going to bunt here, I'm going to use the pinch hitter, that the next step in games in the 90s was to really build something where you had a full roster and you could trade players and you could trade prospects even, and, you could negotiate with them for contracts and so on. And so I think in the 90s, the statistical databases that I had access to did not include minor league players. And so we'd either create guys with fake names, or you'd start playing the game and they'd just you'd get them in the draft and they'd add that way. But I certainly knew from an early stage that having that depth was important in the game.
Okay. Whether you use the players or not, just looking back, like I grew up in New York, the Yankees, I'm thinking in 1958, who was coming up? The Bobby Richardson, that kind of thing, where you see prospects coming up, that's great. Before we start talking about when you were 12, let me just ask you one more question about the game itself. Are fielding skills really, do they make a difference? If you've got an outfield that of tremendous Jackie Jensen, whatever, whoever, Jimmy Pearsall, does it really make a difference in the odds of the game and the probabilities of the game?
Yeah, it very much does. I don't want to, get into the weeds too much, but obviously there's an original batter-pitcher confrontation which sort of decides if the ball's put into play and where it's put, and then after that it will check the fielders and check their range factors, or in the game it's generally a range rating that's derived from, for early years it was derived from range factors. These days we use a lot of the total zone stats, and I forget the name of something else. There's a baseball reference stat that you can actually calculate back using RetroSheet, and I use an algorithm very similar to that, not exactly the same because I don't always have the same stats for every year that they have. But if a guy like Jackie Jensen saves you 10 runs over the course of a year, and Baseball Reference has done the math on that, then he will save you about 10 runs in Baseball Mogul. That's a very important part of getting it right.
Beautiful.
And 10 runs might not be a lot, but yep.
10 runs is quite a bit when you think about it, and it makes it realistic, which is the name of the game, if you will, for me. I said no more questions, but I have one, and oh my God, it slipped my mind. One other one, and I have the 2011 edition. If I upgraded to the recent edition, would it make much of a difference in playability, or the manager, because I play against the computer, would it make much difference, much of an improvement in, like, will the computer come in and pinch hit more or at better times, that kind of thing? That was a well-worded question. I should be a podcaster. Please pick me up.
Well, the nice thing about doing this for so long and being on Facebook and having just basically having my email address on the website, and I think even in the game, is I get a ton of feedback from people saying, hey, you know what, I was playing this game and, it put my closer in the 7th inning, and that doesn't, maybe that makes sense in 2018, but it doesn't make sense in 1962. And so I'll go back and tweak those things. So I know that I actually did a fair bit of work last year making some improvements to the relief pitcher AI. It wasn't always, it was sort of, if a guy was tired, it wasn't using him, even though he was only a little bit tired. So a guy might throw 20 pitches in Game 6 of the World Series, and then in Game 7 the manager would say, "Oh, I don't want to use him. He's tired," and that was dumb, because if he's a good pitcher and you need him, so I have tweaked some of those things. So I don't know the extent to which you'd notice the differences, but I'm constantly trying to improve and make those changes. So I think you probably would notice.
Beautiful. One other question. Is there a chance of when you set the lineups, I got Boston going against Cleveland, for instance. I've got to go, if I'm in the middle, past the first month, when players start getting tired, I have to look up, before I punch the game in, I have to look up who's tired under the lineups, the individual teams, right? It says if a guy's tired, it'll show on there. So then when you go to punch in the game, Skowron was tired, we'll bring in someone else, that kind of thing. Is there a way to put who's tired on when you're fixing the lineups, so you don't have to go back to the team lineups that you already set? You know what I'm saying? Hope you're still there. Clay. Oh my God. Clay, did I lose you? Ah. You're back.
You still there? Sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
I don't either, but I was in a elongated question, and I came to the end, and there wasn't anybody there. Okay, here's the final question I have of you is this. When you fill out your lineups, before you fill out your lineups, you have to go to the team lineups to see who's tired, so you can rest them when you fill out the lineups. Okay?
Yep.
Is there a way to find out, or you could fix it so you could find out who's tired when you're setting the lineups, so you don't have to go and make note? You're playing eight teams, 8 games. You want to set, make it easier on yourself. Could you get the information of who's tired when you're setting the lineup, as opposed to having to go back and in the team, under the team lineups?
I'm not entirely sure I have a perfect answer for that, because I don't have that part of the game running right now. But it seems like if that info isn't available directly in the pregame lineup screen, I probably should add it, and it wouldn't be too hard to do that. Luckily, I'm in the process of finishing up the beta version for this year, so I might be able to do that relatively easily. I think if you double-click and open a scouting report, there might be some information there about, I know for pitcher fatigue it's there, but I 100% give you a good answer without looking at the game and the code.
Okay, well, get on it, young man. Wow, that would be super, because it just saved me a bunch of time and having to write down who's tired, and then when I'm filling out when you go to the lineup to check it, make sure the pitcher is well rested. They do, when the pitcher is tired, they tell you that when you fill out your lineups, but they don't. But they don't tell you when the batters are tired.
That might be in a newer version, but I'm not going to promise it until I check.
Okay. Appreciate that, and at least I have some dialogue going with the man who invented. You said when we talked off the air and we were talking about being 12, you were playing dice baseball.
Yeah. Let's see. It's funny. I can't exactly remember what I was doing
with cards or whatever. How did you get interested in that? Did you do it solitaire or did you do it with friends?
I started off solitaire. What's funny is I actually lived in England until I was 5, and so I really wasn't much of a baseball fan there, if I remember. But I was looking through some of my old stuff my mom had kept, and I have this dice-based game I actually wrote when I was 5 years old. I was a precocious little nerd, and I had just moved to California, and my dad was teaching me about baseball. And he's a big Dodger fan. Grew up in Brooklyn in the 50s and late 40s. So obviously I'm familiar with the 55 Dodgers that you mentioned before. And a little bit familiar with the 63 Dodgers, although I know by 63, well, first of all, he was a little pissed at the Dodgers for leaving New York. And he also was overseas in the military in the 60s, so he didn't teach me about Kovacs and Drysdale as much as Jackie Robinson and Pee Wee Reese. So I put together something with a couple of six-sided dice that I'd gotten out of a Monopoly game, and I don't know if I'd seen other games at the time and said, oh, I can do something like that, or if it's just a natural thing. And I think the number of people that I talk to that have made their own games or want to make their own games, I think it's just a logical extension. Excuse me a second.
There was a game out called All-Star Baseball with the little things that you put over the spinner.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that. They didn't factor in pitching. And
what's funny is that's from about age 6 to 11, that was the game I played the most, mostly because my next door neighbor had it, and I'd just run over and we'd play for hours. And we knew that it wasn't perfect, but we had a lot of the cards, and it was fun.
Babe Ruth had a big strikeout and a big home run on his card. So it wasn't totally realistic, of course, but it was set the tone for the idea that when, unless you did something with the dice to make Don Hoke play differently than a Jackie Robinson, for instance, to pull two names off the 55 Dodgers. The All-Star game was kind of a nice diversion, and especially during the cold winters in New York. Played a lot with that. What part of California did you grow up in?
Oh, in the late 70s, I was living in Atherton, and so I think I need to tell my dad he shouldn't have sold that house in 1982 because it was a lot more affordable then.
Willie lived in Atherton, if I'm not mistaken. Willie Mays, kind of ritzy, if you will.
Yep. Yeah.
What did your dad do that he passed on some good genes to you?
He was a management consultant for the Boston Consulting Group, and so that's why I lived in London. Lived in London in the early 70s. Lived in California. He actually came out to open up the Palo Alto office. I think it was in Palo Alto. In 1976, and then they called him back to Boston in 82. So I, moved around a bit as a kid, but mostly settled in New England after that, although at the moment I'm actually back in northern California, about 4 hours north of San Francisco.
I'm in Alameda, which is 19 minutes away from San Francisco.
Yeah.
And spent some time up in Humboldt and in my day, and Northern California is beautiful.
Yeah.
You're a lucky man. Tell me more about age 12. Baseball memories that you had that stick with you, because it's my philosophy. Age 12, passion and reason come together. So hit it. Take it away, Clay.
So I was 11 years old in 1982 when we moved from California to Boston. And let's see, at the time I was basically a Giants fan because I'd lived in the Bay Area. But my dad was able to score some tickets from a brother-in-law to the Red Sox, and so I quickly became a Red Sox fan. I unfortunately can't even tell you what the Red Sox did in '83. I think they were, I was a fan of them. I was a fan of Jim Rice. I was a fan of Carl Yastrzemski. And Marty Barrett might have been on the team by then. I think Wade Boggs might have been there. I remember the 85 and 86 teams. The Buckner team, of course, a lot better than I remember when I was sort of in middle school and just getting to know the team. So that was definitely an interesting time.
I was a Met fan in '86, so for many years before. So I remember Buckner.
Yes, I'm sure you do.
I also remember Stapleton. I think that was the first baseman's name that should have replaced Buckner if Johnny McNamara were to sleep on the bench.
Yep. I think it was Dave Stapleton.
Dave Stapleton, not Singleton. Boy.
I think that's right.
Yeah, well, memory fades, but not yours, my friend.
Yeah.
You have a terrific memory, and you put together a great guy. So I wanted to end that segment by just thanking you for the joy you've brought me.
Oh, awesome. You're welcome. And I'll definitely check on those suggestions you had and see whether they're in there. Okay.
But not without getting more extended memories of when you were 12.
Yeah. When was Fernando Valenzuela? 81? So I was...
Yeah.
So I sort of became a Giants fan, but unfortunately my dad grew up in Brooklyn, so he was a Dodger fan. And I hate to admit it, but after I left the Bay Area, I basically became a Dodger fan too. So, you always need one team in each league is what my dad told me, and I think that's how he convinced me to be a Dodger fan. He's like, in the American League, you can be a Red Sox fan, but in the National League, you got to root for someone. And so definitely in the early 80s, I was rooting for... And the late 80s, including the 88 championship, was rooting for the Dodgers. But Ron Sace, Steve Garvey, Bill Russell, a shortstop.
You got the Kirk Gibson home run against Eckersley, if I remember correctly.
Yep, yes.
That had to be nice as a Dodger fan.
Yeah, so that was definitely fun. And I definitely had, my dad and I both loved Valenzuela. He was a rookie at a time where there actually weren't that many like Spanish-speaking guys in the. I'm sorry.
I was going to say he looked 35 years old when he came up, which was.
He did, yeah, and he seemed a little chubby, and so I think my dad liked him for that. He didn't feel like he was being outclassed physically by him.
Okay. Get off the subject of baseball for one quick question. You developed other games for Sports Mobile. You developed the football game as well.
Yes. Football Mogul is very similar to Baseball Mogul. It's got the general manager aspects. We have, in Baseball Mogul, we have stats going back to 1901. Actually, we have stats from the 1800s, but you can't play an 1800s team. And the answer to that's just I didn't think the 1800s were a lot of fun to play, although I think at some point I'll probably add those as options. In Football Mogul, we have stats going back to 1951. Again, I wasn't around in the 30s to be an NFL fan, and a lot of people I talk to aren't really fans of those teams either. But definitely I know a lot of people that are fans of the 50s Bears and Packers and the 60s. I was a bit of a fan in the 70s of the Dallas Cowboys just because our neighbors were, and they got me into football. So anyway, football and baseball have definitely been two sports I grew up with and knew very well, so those were the logical sports to try to make games of.
Now, I've never played the football game, never even seen the football game, but does it play out a little bit like the baseball game, or is it just on fourth down, somebody threw a Hail Mary? And does it show a guy throwing the ball or show the runner running?
It does not have those levels of animations. It does have sort of a text play-by-play. So it'll say, Brady gets the snap, Brady drops back 5 feet, and these are just words appearing on the screen. I don't have a professional announcer or anything like that. And then, so sort of as the play unfolds, it tells you what happens in 4 or 5 lines. Throws to Gronk drops it, incomplete pass, and then you go back and then it puts you back in a place where you actually can pick plays. And so there's one of the nice things in football, but obviously you don't get in baseball, is a play designer where you can say, all right, I want to build a formation with 3 wide, and I want this guy to go deep, and I want this guy to go across, and that's especially as kids, that was when I was 12. To get back to the main point, I was definitely playing Nerf football in the streets with my friends, and we spent a lot of time, drawing the plays on your hand about where everyone was going to go, and go to the red car and then turn right. I'm not sure it ever worked that well, but it was fun.
A button hook, a down and out. Those were the right across the middle, and this and that on 3. 1, 2, 3. The guy turns around and you hit him with the Nerf ball. If you ever need an announcer, a voiceover guy, I may be your man, because I can show a little enthusiasm, and I can read a copy. So
awesome.
Think of me someday. I don't really want to do it for the money. I want to do it for the idea of doing it, being my voice on a game like that would be absolutely terrific. May I ask you something about giving the pictures onto the game? How does that work?
Sure. Well, what Baseball Mogul does now, let's see. It's funny, in the early 2000s, we actually had a licensing agreement with the Major League Baseball Players Association, and they supplied us with photos of the players. We did not have an agreement with Major League Baseball, which meant that we weren't allowed to include visual trademarks, which essentially are like team logos. And so at the time, my wife and another friend of mine who was an artist spent a lot of time, removing Cubs logos off of hats in all these photos. So we had those photos available to us a long time ago. There was a court case in 2006, I think, where Major League Baseball sued a fantasy baseball company. And the fantasy baseball company won. They basically said, you can't use the name Barry Bonds without our permission. And they also said, you can't use the name Chicago Cubs without our permission. And the court said, hey, you know what? If the New York Times can print box scores then a fantasy website can print box scores. And as it turns out, that decision extends to, every game in my genre, Stratomatic, Baseball Mogul, Football Mogul. We're all legally protected. We're allowed to use team names. We're allowed to use player names. We're allowed to use player stats. What we aren't allowed to do is include team logos in the game. And so a lot of people will often download those, and I say, hey, here's the folder where the logos go. And so people do that on their own. And so, over the years, we've accumulated photos. We have some options to download photos. People share photos. But as you know, I think from the version you're playing in, we have a decent number of the more recent ones. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, that's sort of the effort. There's the legal issue. There's paying someone for the rights to use a photo. Since Wikipedia has evolved, there's a lot of photos that are that people have taken themselves, depending on who the players are, that they make available under a Creative Commons license. The rules of which are, hey, you can use this photo however you want. You don't have to pay me, but you do have to give me credit. And so in the game, we include a big text file that says this photo was taken by Joe Smith, and this photo was taken by whatever. And then that, of course, means that if people want to reuse the photos in their own things, they can do that too. So it's a lot of people working together in many ways to just make as much stuff available as possible.
Who greased the way for you a little bit when you first started?
Oh, in the biggest person that made it. I'm sorry?
In gaming.
Yeah. Well, in 1993, I graduated from college, and my wife had gotten, she wasn't my wife at the time, but she was my girlfriend, and I followed her. I was on the East Coast, and I followed her out to California, and ended up working for the game company she was at. And that company was Stormfront Studios, which made the Tony La Russa baseball games in the early 90s.
It was a great game. The little guys ran around. You could Negro League teams. Oh my God! If I could get that again, I know you need DOS and what have you, but I'd love. Is there a simple way I could get that game?
I don't think so. That's. I would love to sort of have it around too, because I definitely put a lot of work into. I did not work on Tony La Russa Baseball 1, but I worked a lot on version 2 and 3, and I guess a game that old time baseball was what we probably called 3.5 inside the company. But yeah, all those games together.
Boy, you've given me years and years, literally, of entertainment. I hit tennis balls against the wall. I do this against the computer. I'm one of those people that you've helped through life, and I thank you for it sincerely.
Awesome, that is great.
Yeah. One more memory of when you were a kid at age 12 that perhaps reflects the fact that you were, as we all were, innocent in those days, and not so much now. How were you innocent? And you know what I'm saying? What memories do you have of going, wow, I didn't know. What didn't you know?
Boy, it's funny. The first example is the one that we were just talking about, which is like you're making a baseball game when you're 12, and it's dice and paper. And I actually had an Apple II Plus when I was 12 also, and so by then I was starting to build some baseball sims on the computer.
I had an Abacus when I was 12.
So of course The thing they don't tell you, I mean, the thing that blew my mind is when I was 12, if I go back and tell the 12-year-old kid, hey, you'll actually be making a living from this when you grow up, I'd be amazed, because I woke up every day and my dad was in a suit going to work and getting on a plane and flying around, and it just seemed like an awful hassle just to get enough money to pay the bills. But I sort of assumed I was going to be in one of those jobs, upper middle class kid and goes to college and figures that's how it's going to be. So I was definitely quite lucky to stumble into that. And the innocence, of course, is like I didn't realize at the time that, there'd be people like Major League Baseball saying, hey, you can't do that. And you'd have to wait for some big company to fight a lawsuit and benefit from that. Or you'd have to deal with copyright issues. You'd have to deal with Windows. You'd have to deal with viruses. You'd have to deal with sort of all these things that you have to do just to put out a piece of software that you can't just make a game and be done with it.
Well, you have a combination of computer skills and articulation. And that is a rare attribute or attributes. So naturally you're successful on some level because it does take the computer will never replace the human and vice versa. So you're doing great, Clay. Thank you so much for being a guest.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks for the compliments. I'm so glad. I mean, literally every single person I get an email from is the reason I get out of bed and work. Like, obviously the primary reason is the more people who buy Baseball Mogul, the more, ability I have to pay the mortgage and pay for my daughter in college right now. But the funny thing is the stuff that actually excites me is when I get an email and someone says, hey, you know what, I've been playing your game for 8 years and I love it. And obviously if someone says, I've been playing your game for 8 years and I love it, but, it would be great if you could see the player fatigue levels in this screen and not just in that screen. When I get that kind of feedback, it definitely helps if the people enjoy the game and I know they're enjoying it. And so I know that I can put a few hours in to fix something for them and it really improves their lives.
Tell me when you do it and I will buy the new version at that time.
Awesome. I will.
Beautiful. Thank you, my friend. Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph Tycho, a happy little Jewish kid having a wonderful day with Clay, rather. It's a great day, but not the greatest of days. I would have gotten Clay right. Hey, listen, come back again real soon, and I hope I put a smile on your face.
Oh, you did. Thank you.
Beautiful. Happy trails, everyone. Thanks for listening. The audience that listens to this one is blessed, as am I. Happy trails, everyone.
All right. Well, I'm still here. I don't know if you are.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.